Live from the BDN Studios, it's Bang and Dang.
That's awesome.
If you don't like that, then
You ain't black.
Welcome back to Battles of the American Civil War with your hosts Bang and Dang, and do we have a big one for this podcast. Probably our biggest episode ever we're going to have right here. This will be it. If you guys are tuning in for the first time, welcome. And,
right. Hope you're ready.
If you don't know what we do here, we have now been over 60, almost this will be the 70th episode we've done of starting from the first battle of the American Civil War up until the Gettysburg right now. So that's 70 episodes, probably at least two per episode. So do the math. We've done almost 200 battles already, and probably about 180-ish more to go on this podcast. We're in the year 1863 with the siege of Vicksburg just about to end right after this battle, which Gettysburg takes place July 1st to the 3rd. And in and around the town of Gettysburg, obviously, the battle involved the largest number of casualties of the entire war and is often described as the war's turning point, with the aforementioned siege of Vicksburg happening at the same time. Shortly after the Army of Northern Virginia won a major victory over the Army of the Potomac at the Battle of Chancellorsville a couple of months ago, General Robert E. Lee decided upon a second invasion of the North, the first which was unsuccessful when they lost the old bloody Battle of Antietam, which to this point I think is the bloodiest battle.
Yes, on American soil.
Right, so Gettysburg about to shatter that.
Invading the North would upset the Union's plans for the summer campaigning season, possibly reduce the pressure on the besieged Confederate garrison at Vicksburg.
Nope.
The invasion would allow the Confederates to live off the bounty of rich northern farms while giving war-ravaged Virginia a much-needed rest. Yeah, Virginia was getting messed up. In addition, General Lee's 72,000-man army could threaten Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington, and possibly strengthen the growing peace movement in the North. Oh, the peace, yeah.
So they want them to basically say, I surrender and we're done with this war because we're getting our asses kicked.
You can have Confederates and we'll be the Union.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, thus, on June 3rd, Lee's army began to shift northward from Fredericksburg, Virginia, following the death of Stonewall Jackson. Lee reorganized his two large corps into three new corps, commanded by Lieutenant General James Longstreet with the First Corps, Lieutenant General Richard S. Ewell for the Second Corps, and Lieutenant General A.P. Hill that commanded the Third. Both Ewell and Hill, who had formerly reported to Jackson as division commanders, were new to this level of responsibility. The cavalry division remained under Major General Jeb Stuart.
This dude's tired. He's been all over the countryside.
He's been just traveling. He's like, where are you, Lee?
Jeez. Well, the Union Army of the Potomac under Major General Joseph Hooker consisted of 7 infantry corps.
For now.
A cavalry corps and an artillery reserve for a combined strength of more than 100,000 men. The first major action of the campaign took place on the 9th of June between cavalry forces at Brandy Station, which we did, near Culpeper, Virginia. The 9,500 Confederate cavalrymen under Jeb Stuart were surprised by Major General Alfred Pleasanton's combined arms force of 2 cavalry divisions, 8,000 troops, and 3,000 infantry. Wow. But Jeb eventually repelled the Union attack.
Yeah, well, that inconclusive battle, the largest predominantly cavalry engagement of the war, proved for the first time that the Union horse soldier was equivalent to his Southern counterpart.
Well, I don't know. Maybe. Yeah, for the first time.
This is a lie. This is such a lie because we've read this sentence with 3 other battles. So remember that one battle was when the cavalry was like the first time that they beat the Southern cavalry?
Well, the Confederate cavalry was their high point. They didn't have anything else. Barely had any artillery.
Couldn't do any artillery, that's for sure.
No Navy.
Right. By mid-June, the Army of Northern Virginia was poised to cross the Potomac and enter Maryland. After defeating the Union garrisons at Winchester and Martinsburg, Ewell's Second Corps began crossing the river on June 15th. Hill's and Longstreet's Corps followed on June 24th and 25th. Then Hooker's army pursued them, keeping between Washington, D.C. and Lee's army. The Union crossed the Potomac from June 25th to the 27th, so now they're all going to be right there, man.
Lee gave strict orders for his army to minimize any negative effects on the civilian population. Food, horses, other supplies were generally not seized outright unless a citizen concealed property. Although quartermasters reimbursing northern farmers and merchants with Confederate money, which was virtually worthless, or with equally worthless promissory notes, were not well received. Like, what do you want me to do with this? Various towns, most notably York, Pennsylvania, were required to pay indemnities in lieu of supplies under threat of destruction.
Jeez.
Like, you better give us this shit or we'll just burn it down.
Right. We'll take it and then we'll ruin your life. During the invasion, the Confederates seized between 40 and nearly 60 Northern African Americans. A few of them were escaped fugitive slaves, but many were free men. All were sent south into slavery under guard.
Oh, wow.
June 26, elements of Major General Jubal Early's division of Ewell's Corps occupied the town of Gettysburg after chasing off newly raised Pennsylvania militia in a series of minor skirmishes. Early laid the borough under tribute, but did not collect any significant supplies. Soldiers burned several railroad cars and a covered bridge and destroyed nearby rails and telegraph lines. It said nobody's getting in and nobody's getting out.
Yep, even Lloyd's. The following morning, Early departed for the adjacent York County. Meanwhile, in a controversial move, General Lee allowed Stuart to take a portion of the Army's cavalry and ride around the east flank of the Union Army.
And this is where he's
never to be seen from again. Right. Lee's orders gave Stuart much latitude. Both generals share the blame for the long absence of Stuart's cavalry, obviously, as well as the failure to assign a more active role to the cavalry left with the army. Yeah, they're like, what do we do? Like, I don't know.
Jeb's not here.
Take care of the horses. Stuart and his 3 best brigades were absent from the army during the crucial phase of the approach to Gettysburg and the first 2 days of battle. Yeah.
Yeah, by the time he got there, it didn't mean shit.
Mm-hmm.
June 29th, Lee's army was strung out in an arc from Chambersburg, which is 28 miles northwest of Gettysburg, to Carlisle, which is 30 miles north of Gettysburg, to near Harrisburg and Wrightsville on the Susquehanna River. So they're everywhere. In a dispute over the use of forces defending the Harper's Ferry garrison, Hooker offered his resignation, and Abraham Lincoln and General-in-Chief Henry Halleck, who were looking for an excuse already to rid themselves of him, immediately accepted. They're like, yes.
Yeah.
They replaced Hooker early on the morning of June 28th with Major General George Meade, who was then the commander of the 5th Corps. Yeah, dude. 3 days before the freaking battle.
Yeah, and he gets all the credit for Gettysburg.
Right. Well, he was, you'll see, he did do shit that Hooker definitely wouldn't have done.
He was a decent general. I think he's the last until Ulysses, right?
Yep.
29th of June, General Lee learned that the Army of Potomac had crossed the Potomac. He ordered concentration of his forces around Casstown, located at the eastern base of South Mountain and 8 miles west of Gettysburg. South Mountain, huh? June 30th, while part of Hill's Corps was in Cashtown, one of Hill's brigades was North Carolinians under Brigadier General J. Johnston Pettigrew. They ventured toward Gettysburg. In his memoirs, Major General Henry Heth, Pettigrew's division commander, claimed that he sent Pettigrew to search for supplies in town, especially shoes.
You know, they need them shoes. Well, when Pettigrew's men approached Gettysburg on June 30th, they noticed Union cavalry under Major General John Buford arriving south of town, so they're getting there together.
Oh, wow.
Pettigrew returned to Cashtown without engaging them. They're like, oh, shit.
You ain't good.
Well, when he told Hill and Heth what he had seen, neither general believed that there was a substantial Union force in or near the town, suspecting that it had only been Pennsylvania militia. Despite Lee's order to avoid a general engagement until his entire army was concentrated, Hill decided to mount a significant reconnaissance in force the following morning to determine the size and strength of the enemy force in his front. About 5 a.m. Wednesday, July 1st, 2 brigades of Heth's division advanced to Gettysburg. And there it is.
Army of Potomac, initially under Hooker, now Meade replaced Hooker in command on 28th of June, which we just said, consisted of more than 100,000 men. The 1st Corps, commanded by Major General John F. Reynolds, with divisions commanded by Brigadier General Wadsworth, Brigadier General Robinson, and Brigadier General Abner Doubleday.
Oh, Doubleday.
2nd Corps, commanded by Major General Winfield Scott Hancock, had Brigadier General Caldwell, Gibbon, and Hayes with him. 3rd Corps, commanded by Major General Daniel Sickles. He also had Major General David Birney and Major General Andrew Humphreys on his side. Moving on to the 5th Corps. 4th Corps is like, we don't want to be involved.
Right. No, thank you.
All right. 5th Corps, commanded by Major General George Sykes. He was with Meade until the 28th.
Well, that was Meade's
right.
corps until they got promoted.
Okay, yeah. With divisions with Brigadier Generals James Barnes, Romine Ayres, and Samuel Crawford by his side. Moving on to the 6th Corps, commanded by Major General John Sedgwick. He had Brigadier General Horatio Wright, Brigadier General Albion Howe, and Major General John Newton. Moving on to the 9th Corps, or the 11th Corps. Wow, what happened to the rest? Commanded by Major General Oliver Otis Howard. He had Brigadier General Francis Barlow, Brigadier General Adolph von Steinrock, and Major General Karl Schurz. Well, they got
that's the Germans.
German. Yeah. Moving on to the 12th Corps, commanded by Major General Henry Slocum. We've heard of him. He had Brigadier General Alpheus Williams and John Geary. Cavalry Corps commanded by Major General Alfred Pleasanton with Brigadier General John Buford, David Gregg, and Hudson Kilpatrick. Artillery Reserve commanded by Brigadier General Robert O. Tyler. Preeminent artillery officer at Gettysburg was Brigadier General Henry Hunt, Chief Artillery's on Meade's staff. So, yeah, he's bringing his own campaign. During advance on Gettysburg, Reynolds was in operational command on the left or advanced wing of the Army, consisting of the 1st, 3rd, and the 11th Corps. Many other Union units, not part of the Army of the Potomac, were actively involved in Gettysburg campaign as well, but not directly involved in the Battle of Gettysburg.
Yeah, the battles leading up to it and all that.
These included portions of the Union.
Oh, there's your 4th Corps you were wondering about.
Militia and they're tired. The militia and state troops of the Department of the Susquehanna and various garrisons, also including that of Harper's Ferry, which we did.
Yes, sir. In reaction to the death of Jackson after Chancellorsville, we already said Lee organized his army from 2 infantry corps to 3.
Yes, this is
that's all he has,
right.
dude. The 1st Corps commanded by James Longstreet with divisions commanded by Major Generals Lafayette McLaws, George Pickett, and John Bell Hood. 2nd Corps commanded by Lieutenant General Richard Ewell, with divisions commanded by Major Generals Jubal Early, Edward Johnson, and Robert Rhodes. 3rd Corps was commanded by Lieutenant General A.P. Hill, with divisions commanded by Major Generals Richard Anderson, Henry Heth, and Dorsey Pender. And the Cavalry Division, which we know Jeb Stuart runs that, but he's got brigades commanded by Wade Hampton, Fitzhugh Lee, Beverly Robertson, Albert Jenkins, William E. Grumble Jones, John M. Bowden, and Colonel John R. Chambliss. Holy shit.
Nice. Anticipating that the Rebs would march on Gettysburg from the west on the morning of the 1st of July, General Buford laid out his defenses on 3 ridges west of town: Her Ridge, McPherson Ridge, and Seminary Ridge. These were appropriate terrain for delaying action by a small cavalry division against superior Confederate infantry forces. Meant to buy time awaiting the arrival of Union infantrymen who could occupy the strong defensive positions south of town at Cemetery Hill, Cemetery Ridge, and Culp's Hill. Buford understood that if the cavalry would gain control of these heights, Meade's army would have difficulty dislodging them. Yeah, anybody on top of a hill can do some damage.
Right. Well, Heft's division of the Confederates advanced with 2 brigades forward, commanded by Brigadier Generals James Archer and Joseph Davis. They proceeded easterly in columns along the Chambersburg Pike, 3 miles west of town, about 7:30 a.m. July 1st. 2 brigades met light resistance from vedettes of Union cavalry and deployed into line. According to lore, the Union soldier to fire the first shot of the battle was Lieutenant Marcellus Jones. Eventually, Heth's men encountered dismounted troopers of Colonel William Gamble's cavalry brigade. Oh, Marcellus Jones, did he die? Think he did?
He had to.
Well, this guy, he didn't. Well, died in 1900.
Look at that. 37 years later.
Nice. Good for him, dude.
1830 he was born. He's 70 years old.
Proud, and it was just pencil and fired a shot at an officer on a white or light gray horse. Good for him. Well, that's a trivia question.
Right. The dismounted troops resisted stoutly, delaying the Confederate advance, with most firing their breech-loading Sharps carbines from behind fences and trees. Small number of troops had other carbine models. A small minority of historians have written that some troopers had Spencer repeating carbines or Spencer repeating rifles, but most sources disagree.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think there was.
I don't know.
Still, by 10:20 a.m., the Confederates had pushed the Union cavalrymen east to McPherson Ridge, when the vanguard of the 1st Corps under Major General John Reynolds finally arrived. North of the Pike, Davis gained a temporary success against the Brigadier General Lysander Cutler's brigade, but was repelled with heavy losses in inaction around an unfinished railroad bed cut in the ridge.
South of the Pike, Archer's brigade assaulted through Herbst, also known as McPherson's Woods. The Union Iron Brigade under Brigadier General Solomon Meredith enjoyed initial success against Archer, capturing several hundred men, including Archer himself.
Uh-oh.
General Reynolds was shot and killed early in the fighting while... Reynolds, dude, he had... pretty big part in this war so far. He was shot and killed early in the fighting while directing troop and artillery placements just to the east of the woods. Shelby Foote wrote that the Union cause lost a man considered by many to be the best general in the army at this point. Yeah, dude. Reynolds was a below. That's like Jackson. That's their Jackson.
All right. Major General Abner Doubleday assumed command. He's like, this is my time. Fighting at the Chambersburg Pike area lasted until about 12:30 p.m. It resumed again at around 2:30 after everybody had lunch, took their shit, and a little power nap, and ready to roll again. when Heth's entire division engaged, adding the brigade of Pettigrew and Colonel John Brockenborough. They were like, we're here. As Pettigrew's North Carolina Brigade came online, they flanked the 19th Indiana and drove the Iron Brigade back. The 26th North Carolina, the largest regiment in the Army with 839 men, lost heavily, leaving the first day's fight with around 212 men.
Leaving with 212.
Right.
Wow.
By the end of the 3-day battle, they had about 152 men standing. The highest casualty percentage of one battle of any regiment, north or south. These dudes lost 80% of their freaking army.
Yeah. Slowly, the Iron Brigade of the Union was pushed out of the woods towards Seminary Ridge. A.P. Hill added Major General William Dorsey Pender's division to the assault, and the First Corps was driven back to the grounds of the Lutheran Seminary and Gettysburg streets.
Oh, shit.
As the fighting to the west proceeded, 2 divisions of Ewell's Second Corps, marching west towards Cashtown in accordance with Lee's order for the Army to concentrate in that vicinity, they turned south on the Carlisle and Harrisburg roads towards Gettysburg. They turned south on the Carlisle and Harrisburg roads towards Gettysburg, while the Union 11th Corps raced north on the Baltimore Pike and Taneytown Road. By early afternoon, the Union line ran in a semicircle west, north, and northeast of Gettysburg.
Oh.
So not quite to the east. So
Well. However, though, the Union did not have enough troops. Cutler, whose brigade was deployed north of Chambersburg Pike, had his right flank in the air. The leftmost division of the 11th Corps was unable to deploy in time to strengthen the line. So Doubleday was forced to throw in reserve brigades to salvage his line. Around 2 p.m., the Confederate 2nd Corps Division under Major General Robert Rhodes and Jubal Early assaulted and outflanked the Union. The Union 1st and the 6th, 11th Corps positioned north and northwest of town. Outflanking these guys.
The Confederate brigades of Colonel Edward O'Neill and Brigadier General Alfred Iverson, AI, suffered severe losses assaulting the 1st Corps Division of Brigadier General John Robinson, which was south of Oak Hill. Early's division profited from a blunder by Brigadier General Francis Barlow when he advanced his 11th Corps Division to Bloker's Knoll, directly north of town and now known as Barlow's Knoll. Fitting. This represented a salient in the Corps' line susceptible to attack from multiple sides. And Early's troops overran Barlow's division, which constituted the right flank of the Union Army's position. Barlow was wounded and captured in the attack. Breaking down, dude.
Break it down. As Union positions collapsed both north and west of town, Howard ordered a retreat on the high ground south of town at the Cemetery Hill, where he had left a division of Brigadier Generals Adolph von Steuer in reserve. Steinwehr. Major General Winfield Hancock assumed command of the battlefield. Sent by Meade when he heard that Reynolds had been moited. Hancock, commander of the 2nd Corps and Meade's most trusted subordinate, was ordered to take command of the field and determine whether Gettysburg was an appropriate place for a major battle.
I don't think you have a freaking choice, dude.
Yeah, I don't think you have a choice. Hancock told Howard, I think this is the strongest position by nature upon us to fight a battle that I ever saw.
Oh, yeah, it sure would be. Well, when Howard agreed, Hancock concluded this discussion. He says, very well, sir. I select this as the battlefield. Hancock's determination had a morale-boosting effect on the retreating Union soldiers, but he played no direct tactical role on the first day.
Right.
General Lee understood the defensive potential to the Union if they held this high ground. He sent orders to Ewell at Cemetery Hill to be taken if practicable. Ewell, who had previously served under Jackson, a general well known for issuing peremptory orders, determined such an assault was not practicable and thus did not attempt it.
Right.
This decision is considered by historians to be a great missed opportunity because he probably could have taken it.
Most likely at that point in time. Wow. Moving on, though, as it is, first day, Gettysburg, more significant than simply a prelude to the bloody second and third days. This ranks as the 23rd biggest battle of the war by number of troops engaged.
That's just the first day. About
1/4 of Meade's army, 22,000 men, and 1/3 of Lee's army, with 27,000 men, were engaged in this battle.
Wow. Well, throughout the evening of July 1st and the morning of July 2nd, most of the remaining infantry of both armies arrived on the field, including the Union 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 6th, and 12th Corps. 2 of Longstreet's divisions were on the road, which was Brigadier General George Pickett. He had begun a 22-mile march from Chambersburg, where Brigadier General Evander McLaw, or M-Law, had begun the march from Guilford. Both arrived late in the evening. Law completed his 28-mile march in only 11 hours. Damn. The Union line ran from Culp's Hill southeast of the town, northwest of the Cemetery Hill just south of town, then south for nearly 2 miles along Cemetery Ridge, terminating just north of Little Round Top.
Uh-oh.
Dude, freaking 2 miles.
You ain't kidding. Most of the 12th Corps was on Culp's Hill. The remnants of the 1st and 11th Corps defended Cemetery Hill. 2nd Corps covered most of the northern half of Cemetery Ridge, and the 3rd Corps was ordered to take up a position to its flank. The shape of the Union line is popularly described as a fish hook. Right. Up. Yeah. Perfect. The Confederate line paralleled the Union line about 1 mile to the west on Seminary Ridge, ran east through the town, then curved southeast to a point opposite of Culp's Hill. Thus, the Union Army had interior lines, while the Confederates were nearly 5 miles long.
Holy shit. Holy shit, dude.
It's ridiculous.
Lee's battle plan for July 2nd called for a general assault of Meade's positions. On the right, Longstreet's 1st Corps was to position itself to attack the Union left flank, facing northeast to straddle the Emmitsburg Road and to roll up the Union line. The attack sequence was to begin with Major Generals John Bell Hood's and Lafayette McLaws divisions, followed by Major General Richard Anderson's division of Hill's 3rd Corps. On the left, Lee instructed Ewell to position his 2nd Corps to attack Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill when he heard the gunfire from Longstreet's assault, preventing Meade from shifting troops to bolster his left. Said, you hear these shots, you attack. This guy can't send reinforcements.
Right. Just everybody's got to fight and defend their own little areas. It's crazy. If you watch the movie Gettysburg, it's pretty much like that.
Well, I'm hoping it would be.
Though it does not appear in either his or Lee's official report, Ewell claimed years later that Lee had changed the order to simultaneously attack, calling for only a diversion to be turned into a full-scale attack if a favorable opportunity presented itself, which is kind of smart. Lee's plan, however, was based on faulty intelligence, exacerbated by Stuart's continued absence from the battlefield. Though Lee personally reconnoitered his left during the morning, he did not visit Longstreet's position on the Confederates' right because he trusted Longstreet. He knows he's got that. It'll probably make Longstreet pissed. You see him, really? You really coming up to my
here? Shouldn't you visit?
Right. Should be somewhere else.
Go to AP Hill and the other guy Ewell. Those two don't even know what they're doing. I've been doing this shit since the beginning.
Better yet, why don't you go find Jeb Stuart, will you?
Right. Where the hell's he at?
Jeez. Even so, Lee rejected suggestions that Longstreet move beyond Meade's left and attack the Union flank, which he should have done, capturing the supply trains and effectively blocking Meade's escape route. I think he should have done that. That should have been Jeb Stuart's plan.
Right. Well, Lee did not issue orders for an attack until 11 a.m. Around noon, General Anderson's advancing troops were discovered by General Sickles' outposts and the 3rd Corps, upon which Longstreet's 1st Corps was to form, which did not get into position until 1 p.m. Jeez, what the hell are they doing?
Right.
Hood and McLaws, after their long march, were not yet in position to not launch their attacks until just after 4 and 5 p.m. respectively.
Jeez,
dude.
Why? Everybody knew what was going on.
It takes a long time to get 10,000 troops situated.
Jeez, Longstreet's left division under Major General Lafayette McLaws advance. They unexpectedly found Major General Daniel Sickles' 3rd Corps directly in their path. Sickles had been dissatisfied with the position assigned to him on the southern end of the Cemetery Ridge.
Oh, poor guy.
Seeing ground better suited for artillery positions 1/2 mile to the west, centered at Sherfy's Farm's peach orchard. He violated orders and advanced his corps to the slightly higher ground along the Emmitsburg Road, moving away from Cemetery Ridge. The new line ran from Devil's Den northwest to the peach orchard, then northeast along the Emmitsburg Road to south of the Cadore Farm.
This created an untenable salient at the Peach Orchard, of course.
Right.
Brigadier General Andrew Humphrey's division in position along the Emmitsburg Road and Major General David Birney's division to the south were subject to attacks from 2 sides and were spread out over a longer front than their small corps could defend effectively. Wow. Confederate artillery was ordered to open fire at 3 p.m. After failing to attend a meeting at this time of Meade's corps commanders, Meade rode to Sickles' position and demanded an explanation of the situation.
He said, what the hell's going on here?
Well, knowing a Confederate attack was imminent and a retreat would be endangered, Meade refused Sickles' offer to withdraw. Nope. He said, no, you stay here and you attack.
You did this.
You did that, dude.
This is where you die, bud.
Right. Man,
wow.
Spoiled.
Meade was forced to send 20,000 reinforcements.
He's like, you idiot.
The entire 5th Corps, Brigadier General John Caldwell's division of the 2nd Corps, most of the 12th Corps, and he did portions of the newly arrived 6th Corps. Hood's division moved more to the east than intended, losing its alignment with Emmitsburg Road, attacking Devil's Den and Little Round Top. McLaws, coming in on Hood's left, drove multiple attacks into nearly thinly stretched Third Corps in the wheat field and overwhelmed them to Sherfy's peach orchard. McLaws' attack eventually reached Plum Run Valley, the Valley of Death, before they were beaten back by the Pennsylvania Reserves. Look at the Pennsylvania Reserves, like, look, I'll do your job.
Right.
Division of the Fifth Corps, these guys are. They were moving down from the Little Round Top.
All right, well, the Third Corps was virtually destroyed as a combat unit in this battle, and Sickles' leg was amputated after it was shattered by a cannonball. Caldwell's division was destroyed piecemeal in the wheat field. Anderson's division from the south, coming from McLaws' left and starting forward around 6 p.m., reached the crest of Cemetery Ridge but could not hold the position in the face of counterattacks from the Second Corps, which included an almost suicidal bayonet charge by the 1st Minnesota Regiment against the Confederate Brigade, ordered in desperation by Hancock to buy time for reinforcements to arrive. Like, you need to go down there and do something, guys. Sorry.
Go. We don't have time to sit there and watch you load your rifle.
Right.
As fighting raged on in the wheat field in Devin's Den, Colonel Strong Vincent of the 5th Corps had a precarious hold on the Little Top Round. On the Little Round Top.
You also called Devil's Den Devin's Den, by the way.
This was an important hill at the extreme left of the Union line. His brigade of 4 relatively small regiments was able to resist repeated assaults by Law's brigade of Hood's division. General Meade's chief engineer, Brigadier General Governor Warren, had realized the importance of this battle and dispatched Vincent's brigade and an artillery battery. It was the 140th New York to occupy Little Round Top, merely minutes before Hood's troops arrived. The defense of Little Round Top, with a bayonet charge by the 20th Maine, ordered by Colonel Joshua Chamberlain, and possibly led down the slope by Lieutenant Holman Melcher. This was one of the most fabled episodes in the Civil War and propelled Chamberlain into prominence after the war. Yeah.
Sure did. Well, Ewell interpreted his orders as calling only for a cannonade. His 32 guns, along with A.P. Hill's 55 guns, engaged in a 2-hour artillery barrage at extreme range that had little effect. Finally, 6 o'clock came around, and Ewell sent orders to each of his division commanders to attack the Union lines in his front. Major General Edward Allegheny Johnson's division had contemplated an assault on Culp's Hill, but they were still a mile away and had Red Rock Creek to cross. The few possible crossings would make significant delays.
Because of this, only 3 of Johnson's 4 brigades moved to the attack. Most of the Hill's defenders, the Union 12th Corps, had been sent to the left to defend against Longstreet's attacks, leaving only a brigade of New Yorkers under Brigadier General George Greene behind strong, newly constructed defensive wakes.
Oh, at least got those.
With reinforcements from the 1st and 11th Corps, Greene's men held off the Confederate attackers, though giving up some of the lower earthworks on the lower part of Culp's Hill. That's fine.
You got to do what you got to do, man.
That's fine.
Well, Jubal Early was similarly unprepared when he ordered Harry Hayes's and Isaac Avery's brigades to attack the Union 11th Corps position on East Cemetery.
How?
Once started, fighting was fierce. Colonel Andrew Harris of the 2nd Union Brigade, 1st Division, 11th Corps, came under a withering attack, losing half his men. Avery was wounded early on, but the Confederates reached the crest of the hill and entered the Union breastworks, capturing 1 or 2 batteries. 1 or 2? That's one's enough.
Right.
Seeing he was not supported on his right, Hayes withdrew.
No.
His right was to be supported by Robert Rhodes's division, but Rhodes, like Early and Johnson, had not been ordered up in preparation for the attack.
Why?
Lee's screwing up right now, man.
Well, he had twice as far to travel as Early did. By the time he came in contact with Union skirmish line, Early's troops had been already withdrawn.
Wow.
Jeb Stuart and his 3 cavalry brigades arrived.
Hey, look, everybody's like, where the hell you been, you stupid bastard?
You're like, oh, Lee, I found him.
What's going on here?
What happened here? Well, I wish you were here.
Jeez.
Wow. He came around noon and had no role in the second day's battle at all because he was resting. Brigadier General Wade Hampton's brigade fought a minor engagement with newly promoted 23-year-old Brigadier General George Armstrong Custer's
We know who that is.
Michigan cavalry near Hunterstown to the northeast of Gettysburg.
Oh, Georgie. Lee wished to renew the attack on Friday the 3rd, using the same basic plan as the previous day. Longstreet would attack the left, Ewell attack Culp's Hill. However, before Longstreet was ready, Union 12th Corps troops started a dawn artillery bombardment against the Confederates on Culp Hill in an effort to regain a portion of their lost works.
Right.
The Confederates attacked, and their second fight for Culp's Hill ended around 11 a.m. after some 7 hours of bitter combat.
Wow.
Holy shit. The Union line was intact and held more strongly than before, they say.
Oh, my goodness.
Uh-oh.
Well, then Lee was forced to change his very plans.
Yeah, you better.
Longstreet would command Pickett's Virginia division of his own 1st Corps, plus 6 brigades from Hill's Corps, and attack on the Union 2nd Corps position at the right center of the Union line on Cemetery Ridge. Prior to the attack, all the artillery the Confederacy would bring to bear on the Union positions would bombard and weaken the enemy's line, they hoped.
Hopefully, right?
Much had been made over the years of General Longstreet's objection to General Lee's plan. In his memoirs, Longstreet states that he told Lee that there were not enough men to assault the strong left center at the Union line by McLaws and Hood's divisions, reinforced by Pickett's brigades. He's like, this just simply not enough.
Well, he thought the attack would be repulsed, and a counterattack would put Union forces between the Confederates and the Potomac. Longstreet wrote that he said it would take a minimum of 30,000 men to attack successfully, as well as close coordination with other Confederate forces.
Right.
He noted that only about 13,000 men were left in the selected divisions after the first 2 days of fighting.
Jeez, that's not
They would have to walk a mile under heavy artillery and long-range musketry fire. Longstreet states that he further asked Lee the strength of a column. He stated 15,000, he being Lee. Opinion was then expressed by Longstreet, by me, he says, I'm assuming, that the 15,000 men who could make successful assault over that field had never been arrayed for battle, but he was impatient of listening and tired of talking, and nothing was left but to proceed.
He knew he was screwed, and they were here.
We got to do something, dude, and we're not backing down.
Around 1 p.m., 150 to 170 Confederate guns began an artillery bombardment that was probably the largest of the war. In order to save valuable ammunition for the infantry attack that they knew would follow, the Army of Potomac's artillery, under command of Brigadier General Henry Hunt, at first did not return any fire. After waiting about 15 minutes, about 80 Union cannons opened fire. The Army of Northern Virginia from the south was critically low on artillery ammo, and the cannonade did not significantly affect the Union position at all, because they never do. They're so stupid. Waste.
Well, let's see. Now here is Lee making a big blunder, because he believed that after Confederate attacks on both the left and right flanks of the Union lines on July 2nd, Meade would concentrate his defenses there to detriment of his center. However, the night of July 2nd, Meade correctly predicted to General Gibbon, after a council war, that Lee would attack the center of his lines the following morning and reinforce that area with additional soldiers and artillery.
Clearly, it's common sense.
Right. The infantry assault was preceded by a massive artillery bombardment that was meant to soften up the Union defense and silence artillery, but it was largely ineffective.
Damn right it was. There goes a good one. Pickett's charge was planned for 3 Confederate divisions, commanded by Major General George Pickett, Brigadier General Pettigrew, and Major General Isaac Trimble, consisting of troops from Lieutenant Longstreet's 1st Corps and Lieutenant General A.P. Hill's 3rd Corps. Pettigrew commanded brigades from Major General Henry Heth's old division, under Colonel Burkett Fry, which is Archer's brigade, Colonel James Marshall, Pettigrew's brigade, Brigadier General Joseph R. Davis, Colonel John Brockenbrough, Trimble, commanding Major General Dorsey Pender's division, had the brigades of Brigadier General Alfred Scales, temporarily commanded by William Lee Lawrence. That's a hell of a way to spell Lawrence.
All right.
And James H. Lane. 2 brigades from Major General Richard Anderson's division, which is Hill's Corps, were to support the attack on the right flank. Brigadier General Cadmus Wilcox and Colonel David Lang, also from Perry's brigade.
Okay, a lot going on there. The target of the Confederate assault was the center of the Union of the 2nd Corps, commanded by Major General Winfield Hancock. Directly in the center was the division of Brigadier General John Gibbon, with the brigades of Brigadier General William Harrow, Colonel Norman J. Hall, and Brigadier General Alexander Webb. To the north of this position were brigades from the division of Brigadier General Alexander Hayes, and to the south was Major General Abner Doubleday's division of the 1st Corps, including the 2nd Vermont Brigade of Brigadier General George Stannard and the 121st Pennsylvania, under the command of Colonel Chapman Biddle.
Hey.
Meade's headquarters were just behind the 2nd Corps line in the small house owned by the widow Lydia Leicester.
Yeah.
Lydia Leicester.
Well, the very specific objective of the assault has been the source of historical controversy. Traditionally, the copse of trees on Cemetery Ridge has been cited as the visual landmark for the attacking force. Historical treatments such as the 1993 film Gettysburg continue to popularize this view, which originated in the work of Gettysburg battlefield historian John Bachelder in the 1880s. However, though, recent scholarship, including published works by some Gettysburg National Military Park historians, has suggested that Lee's goal was actually Ziegler's Grove on the Cemetery Hill, a more prominent and highly visible grouping of trees about 300 yards north of the copse.
Yeah.
It's probably one of them.
Right. The much debated theory suggests that Lee's general plan for the 2nd day attacks, which was the seizure of Cemetery Hill, had not changed on the 3rd day, and the attacks on July 3rd were also aimed at securing the hill and the network of roads it commanded. The copse of trees, currently a prominent landmark, was under 10 feet high in 1863. That's it. Only visible to a portion of the attacking columns from certain parts of the battlefield. From the beginning of the planning, things went awry for the Confederates.
Sure it did. Pickett's division had not been used yet at Gettysburg. A.P. Hill's health became an issue, and he did not participate in selecting which of his troops were to be used for the charge. Why, I'm sure he can still think.
Right.
Some of Hill's corps had fought lightly on the 1st of July and not at all on 2nd of July. However, troops that had done heavy fighting on the 1st of July ended up making the charge.
What a bunch of idiots.
Right. Although this all is known popular history as Pickett's charge, overall command was given to James Longstreet, and Pickett was one of his divisional commanders. It was. Lee did tell Longstreet that Pickett's fresh division should lead the assault, so the name is appropriate, although some recent historians have used the name Pickett Pettigrew Trimble Assault, or less frequently Longstreet's Assault. Never heard of that.
No.
So they can fairly distribute the credit or the blame, which is mostly blame.
Yes.
With no credit to this.
Right. With Hill's sideline, Pettigrew's and Trimble's division were delegated to Longstreet's authority as well. Thus, Pickett's name has been lent to a charge in which he commanded 3 out of the 11 brigades while under the supervision of his corps commander throughout.
Right.
So it's not even his charge.
No.
Pickett's men were almost exclusively from Virginia, with the other divisions consisted of troops from North Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee. The supporting troops under Wilcox and Lang were from Alabama and Florida. In conjunction with the infantry assault, Lee planned a cavalry action in the Union rear. Major General Jeb Stuart led his cavalry division to the east, prepared to exploit Lee's hoped-for breakthrough by attacking the Union rear and disrupting his lines of communication and retreat along the Baltimore Pike. Okay. So now Stuart's finally getting some action in.
All right. Well, Lee planned for an early start. It took all morning to arrange the infantry assault force, though.
Jeez.
Neither Lee's nor Longstreet's headquarters sent orders to Pickett to have his division. Why? Did you guys?
Hey, we're doing this assault, but we're not going to let you know when to put you guys on the battlefield.
Wait, they're not in the battlefield? We didn't get, what
do you mean? You didn't tell them Longstreet? I thought you were supposed to tell them.
Wow. Historian Jeffrey D. Wirt blames oversight on Longstreet, describing it either as a misunderstanding of Lee's oral order or a mistake. How? These guys are like in sync with each other.
Should be.
Some of the many criticisms of Longstreet's Gettysburg performance by the postbellum Lost Cause authors cite this failure as evidence that Longstreet deliberately undermined Lee's plan for the battle.
Maybe he did.
Was there some kind of a little drama there?
Must have been.
Meanwhile, on the far right end of the Union line, a 7-hour battle raged for the control of Culp's Hill.
7 hours.
Lee's intent to synchronize his offensive across the battlefield, keeping Meade from concentrating his numerically superior forces, but the assaults were poorly coordinated, and Major General Edward Johnson's attacks against Culp's Hill petered out just as Longstreet's cannonade began. So bad, dude. How can you go to your biggest battle and then just fall apart? That happens usually it's the Union doing
that. Well, I don't know. The Union
they've been better.
Stepped up on the bigger battles.
Right.
But,
what the hell?
Well, the infantry charge was preceded by what Lee would hope to be a powerful and well-concentrated cannonade of the Union center, destroying the Union artillery batteries that could defeat the assault and demoralizing the Union infantry. But a combination of inept artillery leadership and a defective equipment doomed the barrage from the beginning. Longstreet's corps artillery chief, Colonel Edward Porter Alexander, had effective command of the field. Lee's artillery chief, Brigadier General William Pendleton, played little role other than to obstruct the effective placement of artillery from the other two corps. Despite Alexander's efforts, then there was insufficient concentration of Confederate fire on the objective.
So stupid.
What the hell are these guys doing?
The 3rd of July bombardment was likely the largest of the war, with hundreds of cannons from both sides firing along lines for 1 to 2 hours. Starting around 1 p.m., Confederate guns numbered between 150 and 170 and fired from a line over 2 miles long. Starting with the south at Peach Orchard and running roughly parallel to the Emmitsburg Road. Confederate Brigadier General Evander Law wrote, "The cannonade in the center presented one of the most magnificent battle scenes witnessed during the war. Looking up the valley towards Gettysburg, the hills on either side were capped with crowns of flame and smoke as 300 guns, about equally divided between the two ridges, vomited their iron hail upon each other."
Despite its ferocity, the fire was mostly ineffectual.
Of course, it always is.
Right. Confederate shells often overshot the infantry front lines, in some cases because of inferior shell fuses that delayed detonation.
Right.
And the smoke covering the battlefield concealed the fact from the gunners. Right, so I don't even know where they're shooting.
Right.
Union Artillery Chief Brigadier General Henry Hunt had only about 80 guns available to conduct counter-battery fire. The geographic features of the Union line had limited areas for the effective gun emplacement. He also ordered that firing cease to conserve ammo, but to fool Alexander, Hunt ordered his cannons to cease fire slowly to create the illusion that they were being destroyed one by one. Oh, right. So he's like, boom, every so often, stop firing. That way, like, we got one, boys.
Wow.
Look at this.
By the time all of Hunt's cannon ceased fire and still blinded by the smoke from the battle, Alexander fell for Hunt's deception and believed that many of the Union batteries had been destroyed. Hunt had to resist the strong arguments of Hancock, who demanded Union fire to lift the spirits of the infantrymen pinned down by Alexander's bombardment. He's like, don't worry, I got this. Follow me, man. Follow me on this.
We got it.
Even Meade was affected by the artillery. The Leicester house was a victim of frequent overshots, and he had to evacuate with his staff to Powers Hill. The counter-battery fire depleted the northern ammunition stocks, leaving them insufficient time to replenish before a southern assault. For the rest of his life, Hunt always maintained that he had been allowed to do what he'd intended, saved his long-range shells for the attack he knew was coming, then bombard from the Confederate forces with every gun available once they lined up for their advance. Then the charge would never have happened and saved many northern lives. He's like, if they let me do what I want to do.
That Pickett's charge would have never happened. But the first day was hot, or the day was hot, 87 degrees by one account, and humid. And the Confederates suffered under the hot sun and from the Union counter-battery fire as they awaited the order to advance. When Union cannoneers overshot their targets, they often hit the massed infantry waiting in the woods of Seminary Ridge or in the shallow depressions just behind Alexander's guns, causing significant casualties before the charge even began.
So stupid. So dumb.
Well, we all know Longstreet had opposed the charge from the beginning, convinced the charge would fail, which he was ultimately proved correct, and had his own plan that he would have preferred for a strategic movement around the Union left flank.
Wow. In his memoirs, he recalled telling Lee, General, I have been a soldier all my life. I have been with soldiers engaged in fights by couples, by squads, companies, regiments, divisions, and armies, and should know, as well as anyone, what soldiers can do. It is my opinion that no 15,000 men ever arrayed for battle can take that position. Longstreet wanted to avoid personally ordering the charge by attempting to pass the mantle onto Colonel Alexander, telling him that he should inform Pickett at the optimum time to begin the advance, based on his assessment as the Union artillery had been effectively silenced. He's like, how about you? You figure it out, bud. Right. You make the call.
Although he hadn't become aware of such a development, Alexander eventually notified Pickett that he was running dangerously short of ammo, sending the message, if you are coming at all, come at once, or I cannot give you proper support, but the enemy's fire has not slackened at all. At least 18 guns are still firing from the cemetery itself, he says. Pickett then asked Longstreet, General, shall I advance? Longstreet recalled in his memoirs, the effect to speak the order failed, and I could only indicate it by affirmative bow.
He couldn't say anything.
Longstreet made one final attempt to call off the assault. After his encounter with Pickett, he discussed the artillery situation with Alexander and was informed that Alexander did not have full confidence that all the enemy's guns were silenced and that the Confederate ammunition was almost exhausted. Longstreet ordered Alexander to stop Pickett, but the young colonel explained that replenishing his ammunition from the trains in the rear would take over an hour, and this delay would nullify any advantage the previous barrage had given him. The infantry assault went forward without the Confederate artillery close support that had been originally planned. Ooh.
Can't do that.
Could have probably used that.
Mm-hmm. The entire force that stepped off toward the Union positions at about 2 p.m. comprised about 12,500 men. Although the attack is popularly called a charge, the men marched deliberately in line, prepared to speed up and charge only when they were within a few hundred yards of the enemy. The line consisted of Pettigrew and Trimble on the left, Pickett on the right. The 9 brigades of men stretched over a mile long. The Confederates immediately encountered heavy artillery fire and were slowed by fences in their path. Fire from Lieutenant Colonel Freeman McGilvery's concealed artillery positions north of Little Round Top raked the Confederate right flank. Artillery fire from Cemetery Hill hit the left, while the center faced the cannons of the 2nd Corps with a Union artillery reserve in a second line behind. Dude, they're just getting hammered.
The ground between Seminary Ridge and Cemetery Ridge is slightly undulating, whatever that means, and the advancing troop periodically disappeared from the view of the Union cannoneers while advancing the nearly 3/4 of a mile across open fields to reach the Union line. Holy shit, dude, 3/4 of a mile.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
As the 3 Confederate divisions advanced, awaiting Union soldiers began shouting, Fredericksburg, 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 in reference to the disastrous Union. I was just going to say, it reminded me of that. Right. The Union advance on the Confederate line during the 1862 Battle of Fredericksburg. If you remember, they were all the Confederates behind that stone wall, just obliterating the Union.
Crazy shit. Shell and solid shot in the beginning turned to canister and musket fire as the Confederates came within 400 yards of the Union line. At this point, Confederate Union cohesion and morale began to break down. The last shelter before reaching the Union lines lay at 300 yards in the sunken depression of the Emmitsburg Road. Thousands of Confederates took to the ground there and refused to advance any further, many surrendering to Union troops after the battle. Over 2/3 of the initial force may have failed to make the final charge. Damn, dude, that's ridiculous. At contact, the mile-long front had shrunk to less than a half mile.
Wow.
As the men filled in gaps that appeared throughout the line and followed the natural tendency to move away from the flanking fire.
Right. On the left flank of the attack, Brockenbrow's brigade was devastated by artillery fire from Cemetery Hill. They were also subjected to a surprise musket fusillade from 8th Ohio Infantry Regiment. The 160 Ohioans firing from a single line so surprised Brockenbrow's Virginians, who were already demoralized by their losses to artillery fire, that they panicked and fled back to Seminary Ridge, crashing through Trimble's division and causing many of his men to bolt as well.
Oh, my.
The Ohioans followed up with a successful flanking attack on Davis's brigade, which was now the left flank of Pettigrew's division.
The survivors were subjected to increasingly artillery fire from Cemetery Hill. More than 1,600 rounds were fired at Pettigrew's men during their assault. This portion of the assault never advanced much further than the sturdy fence at the Emmitsburg Road. By this time, the Confederates were close enough to be fired on by artillery canister, and Alexander Hayes' division unleashed very effective musketry fire from behind 260 yards of stone wall. Oh, there's that stone wall. With every rifleman of the division lined up as many as 4 deep, exchanging places in line as they fired and then fell back to reload.
Nice.
That's perfect. Look at that.
In the process, deafening everybody that they're shooting next to. They were at once enveloped in a dense cloud of smoke and dust. Arms, heads, blankets, guns, and knapsacks were thrown and tossed into the clear air. A moan went up from the field, distinctly to be heard amid the storm of battle. So says Lieutenant Colonel Franklin Sawyer from the 8th Ohio.
Man. Trimble's division of 2 brigades followed Pettigrew's, but made poor progress. Confusing orders from Trimble caused Lane to send only 3.5 of his North Carolina regiments forward.
3.5?
Right. Renewed fire from the 8th Ohio and the onslaught of Hayes' riflemen prevented most of these men from getting past the Emmitsburg Road. If you guys ever watched the movie Gettysburg, this is very, they do this one in depth.
Right.
It's crazy. Scales' North Carolina brigade, led by Colonel William L.J. Lawrence, started with a heavier disadvantage. They had lost about 2/3 of their men on the 1st of July.
Wow.
They were also driven back, and Lawrence was wounded. The Union defenders also took casualties, but Hayes encouraged his men by riding back and forth just behind the line, shouting, "Hurrah, boys! We're giving them hell!" 2 horses were shot out from underneath him.
He just gets out another one.
Right.
On the right, he didn't care about his horses, apparently. No feelings whatsoever. On the right
Well, he
flank...
probably lost his original horse a long time ago.
On the right flank, Pickett's Virginians crossed the Emmitsburg Road and wheeled partially to the left to face northeast. They marched in 2 lines led by the brigades of Brigadier General James Kemper on the right, Brigadier General Richard Garnett on the left. Brigadier General Lewis Armistead's brigade followed closely behind them. As the division wheeled to the left, its right flank was exposed to McGilvery's guns and the front of Doubleday's Union division on Cemetery Ridge. Stannard's Vermont brigade marched forward, faced north, and delivered withering fire into the rear of Kemper's brigade.
It's ridiculous,
Jeez, dude.
At about this time, you'd think Lee'd have to be like, dude, we're done.
I don't even know if he's even over here.
At about this time, Hancock, who had been prominent in displaying himself on horseback to his men during the Confederate artillery bombardment, was wounded by a bullet striking the pommel of his saddle, entering his inner right thigh along with the wood fragments and large bent nail.
Holy shit, where the hell did the nail come from? Oh, it must have hit through like the fence or something.
Right. He refused evacuation to the rear until the battle was settled.
Oh, good for him. As Pickett's men advanced, they withstood the defensive fire of first Stannard's brigade, then Harrow's, and then Hall's, before approaching a minor salient in the Union center, a low stone wall taking an 80-yard right-angle turn known afterward as the Angle. It was defended by Brigadier General Alexander Webb's Philadelphia Brigade. Webb placed the 2 remaining guns of the severely wounded Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing's Battery A of the 4th U.S. Artillery at the front of his line at the stone fence with the 69th and 71st Pennsylvania Regiments to defend the fence and the guns. The 2 guns and 940 men could not match the massive firepower that Hayes' division to the right had been able to unleash, though.
Ooh.
So?
Okay, well, at this time, 2 gaps open up in the Union line. The commander of the 71st Pennsylvania ordered his men to retreat when the Confederates came too close to the angle. South of the copse of trees, the men of the 59th New York, which is Hall's brigade, inexplicably bolted to the rear. In the latter case, this left Captain Andrew Cowan and his 1st New York Independent Artillery Battery to face the oncoming infantry.
Jeez.
Assisted personally by Artillery Chief Henry Hunt, Cowan ordered 5 guns to fire double canister simultaneously. The entire Confederate line to his front disappeared. The gap vacated by most of the 71st Pennsylvania, however, was more serious, leaving only a handful of the 71st, 268 men of the 69th Pennsylvania, and Cushing's 2 3-inch rifle guns to receive the 25 to 3,000 men of Garnett and Armistead's brigades from the south as they began to cross the stone fence.
Oh, shit. Well, the Irishmen of the 69th Pennsylvania resisted fiercely in a melee of rifle fire, bayonets, and fists.
Ooh.
Oh, you know they're throwing some fists.
Right.
Webb, who was mortified that the 71st had retreated, brought the 72nd Pennsylvania forward. Initially, the regiment was hesitant to attack, this being due to the regiment not recognizing Webb as a brigadier general because he'd just been recently promoted.
Wow.
However, the 72nd moved forward after realizing their error, helping to plug the gap in the line.
Like, oh, shit. All right.
This guy's giving orders.
All right. During the fight, Lieutenant Cushing was moited as he shouted to his men, 3 bullets striking him in the third in his mouth. The Confederates seized his 2 guns and turned them to face the Union troops. But they had no ammo to fire them. As more Union reinforcements arrived and charged into the breach, the position became untenable, and the Confederates began to slip away individually, with no senior officers remaining to call a formal retreat.
Well, the infantry assault lasted less than an hour. The support and attack by Wilcox and Lang on Pickett's right was never a factor. They did not approach the Union line until after Pickett was defeated, and their advance was quickly broken up by McGilvery's guns and the Vermont Brigade. While the Union lost about 1,500 killed and wounded, the Confederate casualty rate was over 50%. Pickett's division suffered 2,655 casualties, 498 killed, 643 wounded, 833 wounded and captured, and 681 captured unwounded. Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, because they're walking in that open field and watching everybody just get blown to pieces.
Right.
Stupid. Man, these guys. It's the most ridiculous ever seen, man. Wow. That and the Revolutionary War, both the same. Man. Pettigrew's losses are estimated to be about 2,700, with 470 killed, 1,893 wounded, and 337 captured. Trimble's 2 brigades lost 885, 155 killed, 650 wounded, 80 men captured. Wilcox's brigade reports losses of 200. Lang's about 400. Thus, the total losses during the attack were 6,555, of which at least 1,123 Confederates were moited. 4,019 were wounded, and a good number of the injured were also captured. Confederate prisoner totals are difficult to estimate from their reports. Union reports indicated that 3,750 men were captured.
Dude, 1,123 bodies just laying on the battlefield.
Ridiculous. And that's just Confederates.
Right. Well, Union, what? Maybe a couple hundred?
Probably 4 or 5.
Only 1,500 casualties total.
Right.
I doubt that many. The casualties were also high among the commanders of the charge. Trimble and Pettigrew were the most senior casualties of the day. Trimble lost a leg. Pettigrew received a minor wound to the hand, only to die from a bullet to the abdomen, suffered in a minor skirmish during the retreat to Virginia.
Oh, no.
Oh, jeez. In Pickett's division, 26 of the 40 field grade officers, which were majors, lieutenant colonels, and colonels, were casualties, 12 killed or mortally wounded, 9 wounded, 4 wounded and captured, and 1 captured. All of his brigade commanders fell. Kemper was wounded seriously, captured by Union soldiers, rescued, and then captured again during the retreat to Virginia. Jeez. Garnett and Armistead were killed. Garnett had a previous leg injury and rode his horse during the charge, despite knowing that conspicuously riding a horse into heavy enemy fire would mean almost certain death.
Yeah,
he said, I got to lead my guys, man.
And that's sad. There were 2 significant cavalry engagements on July 3rd. The first one was coordinated with Pickett's charge, and the standoff may have prevented a disaster for Union infantry. The site of this engagement is now known as the East Cavalry Field. The second engagement was a loss for Union cavalry attacking Confederate infantry. Wow. It has been labeled as a fiasco and featured faulty cavalry tactics. Yeah, the Union wasn't very good on cavalry. They didn't like horses. They're like show horses.
Right.
The site of this engagement is now known as the South Cavalry Field.
Well, because this one they're facing against Stuart and his cavalry division, which was 3 brigades with the assistance of Jenkins' brigade, and they were sent to guard the Confederate left flank. Stuart was also in position to exploit any successes the Confederate infantry, which was Pickett's charge, might achieve on the Cemetery Hill by flanking the Union right and getting behind Union infantry facing the Confederate attack. The cavalry fight took place about 3 miles northeast of Gettysburg at 3 p.m. around the end of the Confederate artillery barrage that preceded Pickett's charge. Stuart's forces collided with Union cavalry, Brigadier General David McMurtry Gregg's division and Custer's brigade from Kilpatrick's division.
Right. The fight evolved into a wild melee of swinging sabers and blazing pistols and carbines. One of Custer's regiments, the 5th Michigan Cavalry, was armed with Spencer repeating rifles, and at least 2 companies from an additional regiment were also armed with the repeaters.
Those repeaters, man.
They get ya. The fight ended in a standoff, as neither side changed positions. However, Gregg and Custer prevented Stewart from gaining the rear of the Union infantry facing Pickett. If he could have got that could have been nice.
They would have been screwed. After hearing the news of Union's success against Pickett's charge, Brigadier General Judson Kilpatrick launched a cavalry attack against the infantry position of Longstreet's corps southwest of Big Round Top. The terrain was difficult for a mounted attack because it was rough, heavily wooded, and contained huge boulders, and Longstreet's men were entrenched with artillery support. Brigadier General Elon Farnsworth protested against the futility of such a move, but obeyed orders anyways. Farnsworth was killed in the fourth of 5 unsuccessful attacks, and his brigade suffered significant losses.
Jeez.
Although Kilpatrick was described by at least one Union leader as brave, enterprising, and energetic, incidents such as Farnsworth charge earned him the nickname of Kill Cavalry.
Oh, all right.
That's not a nickname you want.
No, that's the same picture they show on every frickin' Gettysburg photo.
Sure, they don't have many.
The 2 armies suffered between 46,000 and 51,000 casualties. Union casualties were 23,055. 3,155 moited, 14,531 wounded, 5,369 captured or missing. While Confederate casualties are more difficult to estimate, many authors have referred to as many as 28,000 casualties for the rebels. And Busy and Martin's more recent 2005 work, Regimental Strengths and Losses at Gettysburg, documents 23,231 with 4,708 killed, 12,693 wounded, 5,833 captured or missing. Nearly a third of Lee's general officers were wounded, or captured. The casualties for both sides for the 6-week campaign, according to Sears, were 57,225 men.
Jeez.
Man.
In addition to being the deadliest battle of the war, Gettysburg also had the most generals killed in action. Several generals were also wounded. The Confederacy lost Generals Paul Jones Semmes, William Barksdale, William Dorsey Pender, Richard Garnett, and Lewis Armistead, as well as J. Johnson Pettigrew during the retreat after the battle. Confederate generals who were wounded included Major General John Bell Hood, who lost the use of his left arm, Major General Henry Heth, who received a shot to the head on the first day of battle. Though incapacitated for the rest of the battle, he remarkably survived without long-term injuries. Wow. Credited in part due to his hat stuffed full of paper dispatches.
Hey,
look at that. That's where he got all those little orders from and just stuffed them in his hat. Huh?
Good for him. Wow. Confederate generals James L. Kemper and Isaac R. Trimble were severely wounded during Pickett's charge and captured during the Confederate retreat. Confederate Brigadier General James Archer, in command of the brigade that most likely responsible for killing Reynolds from the north, was taken prisoner shortly after Reynolds' death. In Confederate First Corps, 8 of Longstreet's 14 division and brigade commanders were killed or wounded, including Brigadier General George Anderson and Brigadier General Jerome Robertson, who was wounded.
Well, in Ewell's Second Corps, Brigadier General Isaac Avery was mortally wounded. Brigadier General John Jones was wounded. In Hill's Third Corps, in addition to Pender and Pettigrew being killed, Major General Henry Heth and Colonel Burkett Fry, later Brigadier General, and temporary brigade command were wounded as well. Hill's Third Corps, Brigadier General Alfred Scales and Colonel William Lawrence and temporary brigade command were wounded. In the Confederate Cavalry Division, Brigadier General Wade Hampton and Brigadier General Albert Jenkins were also wounded.
Okay, what did the Union do?
Not many.
Union generals killed were General John Reynolds, Samuel K. Zook, and Stephen H. Weed, as well as Elon Farnsworth, assigned as Brigadier General by Major General Pleasanton based on his nomination, although his promotion was confirmed posthumously. And Strong Vincent, who after being mortally wounded was given a deathbed promotion to Brigadier General. I guess, right? Additional senior officers' casualties included the wounding of Union Generals Dan Sickles, who lost a leg, Francis C. Barlow, Daniel Butterfield, and Winfield Scott Hancock. That's a hell of a name. 5 of 7 brigade commanders in Reynolds' First Corps were wounded, in addition to Hancock and Brigadier General John Gibbon being wounded in the Second Corps. 3 of the 10 brigade commanders were killed, and 3 were wounded.
Historian Bruce Catton wrote, the town of Gettysburg looked as if some universal moving day had been interrupted by catastrophe. But there was only one documented civilian death during the battle. It was Jenny Wade, also widely known as Jenny. She was 20 years old and was hit by a stray bullet that passed through her kitchen in town while she was making bread.
Oh, that sucks.
Another notable civilian casualty was
making bread in the middle of a freaking battle.
She was probably a defeat.
All right, I guess you got to eat.
Some of the soldiers or something, I guess. Another notable civilian casualty was John Burns, a 69-year-old veteran of World War XII, the War of 1812, who walked to the front lines on the first day of battle and participated in heavy combat as a volunteer, receiving numerous wounds in the process.
Damn, this dude.
Despite his age and injuries, Burns survived the battle and lived until 1872.
Nice.
Nearly 8,000 had been killed outright. Nearly 8,000 people, men, had been killed outright. These bodies, lying in the hot summer sun, needed to be buried quickly.
Man. Dude, can you imagine?
Just littered, dude.
Everywhere. More than 3,000 horse carcasses were burned in a series of piles south of town. Townsfolk became violently ill from the stench.
Ugh.
Meanwhile, the town of Gettysburg, with a population of 2,400, found itself tasked with taking care of 14,000 wounded Union troops and an additional 8,000 Confederate prisoners. Confederates lost over 31 to 55 battle flags, with the Union possibly have lost slightly less than 40.
All right. On the morning of July 4th, with Lee's army still present, Meade ordered his cavalry to get into the rear of Lee's army. In heavy rain, the army stared at one another across the bloody fields on the same day that, some 900 miles away, the Vicksburg garrison surrendered to Major General Ulysses S. Grant. Lee had reformed his lines into a defensive position on Seminary Ridge the night of July 3rd, evacuating the town of Gettysburg. Confederates remained on the battlefield's west side, hoping that Meade would attack, but the cautious Union commander decided against the risk, a decision for which he would later be criticized. Dude, there's 8,000 men on the field dead already.
Right.
Both armies began to collect the remaining wounded and bury some of the dead. A proposal by Lee for a prisoner exchange was rejected by Meade.
Oh, wow.
Said, nope.
Oh, you said you can keep my guys.
Right.
I'm keeping yours. Late in the rainy afternoon, Lee started moving the non-fighting portion of his army back to Virginia. Cavalry under Brigadier General John M. Bowden was entrusted to escort the 17-mile-long wagon train of supplies and wounded men using a long route through Cashtown and Greencastle to Williamsport, Maryland.
17 miles long, holy shit.
After sunset, the fighting portion of Lee's army began its retreat to Virginia, using a more direct but more mountainous route that began on the road to Fairfield. Although Lee knew exactly what he needed to do, Meade's situation was very different.
He needed to remain at Gettysburg until he was certain Lee was gone. If he left first, he could possibly leave an opening for Lee to get to Washington or Baltimore.
Right.
In addition, the army that left the battlefield first was often considered the defeated army.
Man.
Now, if General Meade can complete his work so gloriously prosecuted thus far by the literal or substantial destruction of Lee's army, the rebellion will be over. Abraham Lincoln, 1863.
Man.
Nobody wants to ever pursue Lee, dude.
Right. It's like, let him go. Union cavalry had some minor successes pursuing Lee's army. The first major encounter took place in the mountains of Monterey Pass on the 4th of July, where Kilpatrick's cavalry division captured 150 to 300 wagons and took 1,300 to 1,500 prisoners. Beginning July 6th, additional cavalry fighting took place closer to the Potomac River in Maryland. This is Williamsport, Hagerstown area. Lee's army was trapped and delayed from crossing the Potomac River because rainy weather had caused the river to swell, and the pontoon bridge at Falling Waters had been destroyed. Meade's infantry did not fully pursue Lee until the 7th of July, and despite repeated pleas from Lincoln and Halleck, was not aggressive enough to destroy Lee's army.
A new pontoon bridge was constructed at Falling Waters, and lower water levels allowed the Confederates to begin crossing after dark on July 13th. They're just sitting by the riverbank for 5 days.
All right.
Although Meade's infantry had reached the area on July 12th, it was his cavalry that attacked the Confederate rearguard on the morning of July 14th. Union cavalry took 500 prisoners, and Confederate Brigadier General Pettigrew was mortally wounded, but Lee's army completed its Potomac crossing.
Right.
The campaign continued south of Potomac until the Battle of Manassas Gap, we'll have coming up, when Lee escapes Meade, and Meade abandons the pursuit. He said, I give up.
All right. What are you going to do? Wow. The news of the Union victory electrified the North. A headline in the Philadelphia Inquirer proclaimed, "Victory! Waterloo eclipsed." New York diarist George Templeton Strong wrote, "The results of this victory are priceless. The charm of Robert E. Lee's invincibility is broken. The Army of the Potomac has at last found a general that can handle it, and has stood nobly up to its terrible work in spite of its long, disheartening list of hard-fought failures. Copperheads are palsied and dumb for the moment at least. Government is strengthened fourfold at home and abroad." George Templeton Strong. His own diary, page 330.
Good for him. However, the Union enthusiasm soon dissipated as the public realized that Lee's army had escaped destruction and the war would continue. Lincoln complained to Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles that our army held the war in the hollow of their hand and they would not close it. Brigadier General Alexander Webb wrote to his father on July 17th, stating that such Washington politicians as Chase, Seward, and others, quote-unquote, disgusted with Meade. They write to me that Lee really won that battle, he says.
I mean, really can't take it as a loss for anybody, even though there was more casualties for Confederates, but still. But they still claim it as a Union victory.
Of course.
He should have done that 2 days earlier. In fact, the Confederates had lost militarily and also politically. During the final hours of the battle, Confederate Vice President Alexander Stephens was approaching the Union lines at Norfolk, Virginia, under a flag of truce. Although his formal instructions, Confederate President Jefferson Davis had limited his powers to negotiate on prisoner exchanges and other procedural matters. Historian James M. McPherson speculates that he had informal goals of presenting peace overtures. President Davis had hoped that Stephens would reach Washington from the south, while Lee's victorious army was marching toward it from the north. Well, that would have worked out well.
Right. President Lincoln, upon hearing of the Gettysburg results, refused Stephens' request to pass through the lines. Furthermore, when the news reached London, any lingering hopes of European recognition of the Confederacy were finally abandoned. Henry Adams, whose father was serving the U.S. as the U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom at the time, wrote, "The disasters of the rebels are unredeemed by even any hope of success. It is now conceded that all idea of intervention is at an end." Ain't no Brits coming to help you guys.
They were thinking about it. They're strongly thinking about it. I think they even got people on ships and then decided to...
They're probably waiting. Yeah.
Right. Compounding the effects of the defeat was the end of the siege of Vicksburg, which surrendered to Grant's federal armies in West on 4th of July. The day after the Gettysburg Battle, costing the Confederacy an additional 30,000 men, along with their arms and stores. The immediate reaction of the Southern military and public sectors was that Gettysburg was a setback, not a disaster. The sentiment was that Lee had been successful on the 1st of July and had fought a valiant battle on the 2nd and 3rd, but could not dislodge the Union Army from the strong defensive position to which it fled. I mean, they did have a good little spot, the Unions did. And come on, you're walking across 300 yards of open field.
Right.
And that's a stupidity.
Well, the Confederates successfully stood their ground on July 4th and withdrew only after they realized Meade would not attack them.
I think the Vicksburg's in the Gettysburg movie, too. I'm not positive.
I'm sure some of it. The withdrawal to the Potomac that could have been a disaster was handled masterfully. Furthermore, the Army of the Potomac had been kept away from Virginia farmlands for the summer, and all predicted that Meade would be too timid to threaten them for the rest of the year. Lee himself had a positive view of the campaign, writing to his wife that the Army had returned, quote-unquote, rather sooner than I had originally contemplated, but having accomplished what I proposed on leaving the Rappahannock, which is relieving the valley of the presence of the enemy and drawing his army north of the Potomac, which he did, yeah, I guess.
He was quoted as saying to Major John Seddon, brother of the Confederate Secretary of War, he says, "Sir, we did whip them at Gettysburg, and it will be seen for the next 6 months that army will be as quiet as a sucking dove." Some Southern publications, such as the Charleston Mercury, were very critical of Lee's actions. On 8th of August, Lee offered his resignation to President Davis, who quickly rejected it.
He's like, "Come on now, guys."
He's like, "Hold on, you just calm down, buddy."
November 19th, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, considered one of the best-known speeches in American history. A crowd of citizens and soldiers surrounded him. The ravages of war were still evident in the Gettysburg more than 4 months later, when, November 19th, the Soldiers' National Cemetery was dedicated. During this ceremony, President Lincoln honored the fallen and redefined the purpose of the war in his historic Gettysburg Address.
Yep, it was a historic one, all right. There were 72 Medals of Honor awarded for the Gettysburg campaign, 64 of which were actions taken during the battle itself. The first recipient was awarded in December 1864, while the most recent was awarded to Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing in 2014. I hate when they do that 100 years later.
Right.
Does it matter?
Way more than 100 years later.
Does it matter now? The nature of...
For their family, maybe?
I guess. The nature of the result of Battle of Gettysburg had been the subject of controversy, although not seen as overwhelmingly significant at the time, particularly since the war continued for almost 2 more years. In retrospect, it has often been cited as the turning point of the Civil War, usually in combination with the fall of Vicksburg the following day. Right. Yeah, if Vicksburg didn't fall the next day, I think it would not been that much of a deal. This
is based on the observation that after Gettysburg, Lee's army conducted no more strategic offensives. His army merely reacted to the initiative of Ulysses S. Grant in 1864 and 65, and by the speculative viewpoint of the Lost Cause writers that a Confederate victory at Gettysburg might have resulted in the end of the war.
Very possible, because they were not too far away from Washington after that.
The Army of the Potomac had won a victory. It might be less of a victory than Mr. Lincoln had hoped for, but it was nevertheless a victory. And because of that, it was no longer possible for the Confederacy to win the war. The North might still lose it, to be sure, if the soldiers or the people should lose heart, but outright defeat was no longer in the cards.
Right.
Bruce Catton, Glory Road.
Right. And basically, we got this. We just don't do no turnovers in the last 2 minutes.
Right.
We're good. It is currently a widely held view that Gettysburg was a decisive victory for the Union, but the term is considered imprecise. It is inarguable that Lee's offensive on the 3rd of July was turned back decisively and his campaign in Pennsylvania was terminated prematurely. Although the Confederates at the time argued that this was a temporary setback and that the goals of the campaign were largely met. However, when the more common definition of decisive victory is intended, an indisputable military victory of a battle that determines or significantly influences the ultimate result of a conflict, historians are there divided.
Well, for example, David J. Eicher called Gettysburg a strategic loss for the Confederacy, and James N. McPherson wrote that Lee and his men would go on to earn further laurels, but they never again possessed the power and reputation they carried into Pennsylvania those palmy summer days of 1863.
Right.
However, though, Herman Hathaway and Archer Jones wrote that the strategic impact of the Battle of Gettysburg was fairly limited. Stephen E. Woodworth wrote, Gettysburg proved only the near impossibility of decisive action in the Eastern Theater. Edwin Coddington pointed out the heavy toll on the Army of the Potomac and that after the battle, Meade no longer possessed a truly effective instrument for the accomplishments of his task.
That's true, too. If Lee had more men and he had more artillery, dude, I'm telling you, it's ridiculous. What they should have been doing is stocking up on Stuarts. They should have everybody on horses. Just go, baby, go. The Army needed a thorough reorganization with new commanders and fresh troops, but these changes were not made until Grant appeared on the scene in March of 1864. Joseph T. Glathar wrote, lost opportunities and near successes plagued the Army of Northern Virginia during its northern invasion. Yet, after Gettysburg, without the distractions of duty as invading force, without the breakdown of discipline, the Army of Northern Virginia remained an extremely formidable force.
Of course.
Ed Beers wrote, Lee's invasion of the North had been a costly failure. Nevertheless, the Army of the Potomac had simply preserved a strategic stalemate in the Eastern Theater.
All right. Well, historian Alan Guelzo notes that Gettysburg and Vicksburg did not end the war and that the war would go on for 2 more years. No shit.
No.
Hey, just so you guys know this.
There was more. Idiot.
He also noted that a little more than a year later, federal armies appeared hopelessly mired in sieges at Petersburg and Atlanta.
It's true.
Peter Carmichael refers to the military context for the armies. He says the horrendous losses at Chancellorsville and Gettysburg, which effectively destroyed Lee's offensive capacity. Okay, implying that these cumulative losses were not the result of a single battle.
Right.
Thomas Goss, writing in the U.S. Army's Military Review Journal on the definition of decisive and the application of that description to Gettysburg, concludes, for all that was decided and accomplished, the Battle of Gettysburg fails to earn the label decisive battle.
It doesn't. But if Stuart would have been there on the very first day.
If he wasn't been through the east on a horse with no name. Dude was just roaming.
And if Stonewall wouldn't have got murdered in the middle of the woods.
That's probably true.
Idiot. Military historian John Keegan agrees. Gettysburg was a landmark battle, the largest of the war, and it would not be surpassed. The Union had restored to its belief in certain victory, and the loss dispirited the Confederacy. If not exactly a decisive battle, Gettysburg was the end of the Confederate use of Northern Virginia as a military buffer zone. And it's true. And this became the setting for Grant's overland campaign.
Well, prior to Gettysburg, Robert E. Lee had established a reputation as an almost invincible general, achieving stunning victories against superior numbers, although usually at the cost of high casualties to his army. During the 7 days, the Northern Virginia campaign, Fredericksburg, and Chancellorsville. Only the Maryland campaign, with its tactically inconclusive Battle of Antietam, had been less than successful. Therefore, historians such as Fuller, Glathar, and Sears have attempted to explain how Lee's winning streak was interrupted so dramatically at Gettysburg.
Although the issue is tainted by attempts to portray history and Lee's reputation in a manner supporting different partisan goals, The major factors in Lee's loss arguably can be attributed to 1. His overconfidence and invincibility of his men, 2. The performance of his subordinates and his management thereof, 3. His failing health, oh, poor guy, and 4. The performance of his opponent, George G. Meade, and the Army of the Potomac. Well, don't give him so much credit there, because the Union there where they were set up was perfect for a defensive battle. That's why they didn't attack. I don't think the Union attacked at all, did they? Throughout the battle?
That one that failed with their cavalry.
Right, that's about it. And all the other ones were led by Confederates just getting mowed down while they're trying to cross 5 football fields. Throughout the campaign, Lee was influenced by the belief that his men were invincible. Most of Lee's experiences with the Army of Northern Virginia had convinced him of this, including the great victory at Chancellorsville in early May and the rout of the Union troops at Gettysburg on the 1st of July.
Come on, you're hanging on to that 1st of July there, bud.
Right.
Since morale plays an important role in military victory when other factors are equal, Lee did not want to dampen his army's desire to fight and resisted suggestions, principally by Longstreet, to withdraw from the recently captured Gettysburg to select a ground more favorable to his army. War correspondent Peter Alexander wrote that Lee acted probably under the impression that his troops were able to carry any position, however formidable. If such was the case, he committed an error. Such, however, as the ablest commanders will sometimes fall into. Lee himself concurred with this judgment, writing to President Davis, "No blame can be attached to the Army for its failure to accomplish what was projected by me, nor should it be censured for the unreasonable expectations of the public. I am alone to blame, and perhaps expecting too much of its prowess and valor."
True. I mean...
Why can't you just say, I overestimated the Union?
Well, not
pretty
even
much
that.
what happened there.
Not even that. I mean, he was a great Union general and knew what an army was. And the South were very terribly terribly
He already has the reputation of taking on armies that were twice his size and beating them, so he was like underestimated Union. Exactly what happened.
The most controversial assessments of the battle involved the performance of Lee's subordinates. The dominant theme of the lost cause writers and many other historians is that Lee's senior generals failed him in crucial ways, directly causing the loss of the battle. The alternative viewpoint is that Lee did not manage his subordinates adequately and did not thereby compensate for their shortcomings. Because he gave so much lenience to his guys, dude. He didn't follow up on what they're doing. 2 of his corps commanders,
that's what they're there for,
Richard Ewell and A.P. Hill, had only recently been promoted and were not fully accustomed to Lee's style of command, which was, hey, bud, I'm going to give you an order and expect you to do it.
Right.
In which provided only general objectives and guidance to their former commander, right, Stonewall Jackson. But Jackson already knew Lee and how to run shit.
Right. Lee would just say, hey, man, we need to go here and take these guys, and then Jackson would be the one that come up to how to do it, pretty much.
Jackson translated these into detailed, specific orders to his division commanders, though. Right, and so these guys didn't get that after that.
All 4 of Lee's principal commanders received criticism during the campaign and battle. Longstreet suffered most severely from the wrath of the Lost Cause authors, not the least because he directly criticized Lee in postbellum writings and became a Republican after the war. Oh, really? His critics accused him of attacking much later than Lee intended on July 2nd, squandering a chance to hit the Union Army before its defensive positions had firmed up. They also questioned his lack of motivation to attack strongly on July 2nd and 3rd because he had argued that the army should have maneuvered to a place where it would force Meade to attack them.
Yes, well, he was right.
The alternative view is that Lee was in close contact with Longstreet during the battle, agreed to delays on the morning of July 2nd, and never criticized Longstreet's performance. There is also considerable speculation that what an attack might have looked like before Dan Sickles moved the 3rd Corps toward the Peach Orchard. Right.
Jeb Stuart deprived Lee of cavalry intelligence during a good part of the campaign by taking his 3 best brigades on a path away from the armies. No, because that's what Lee told him to do.
He wanted to, and Lee agreed.
Right. This arguably led to Lee's surprise at Hooker's vigorous pursuit. The engagement on the July 1st escalated into the full battle prematurely, and it also prevented Lee from understanding the full disposition of the enemy on the 2nd of July. The disagreements regarding Stuart's culpability for the situation originate in the relatively vague orders issued by Lee, but most modern historians agree that both generals were responsible to some extent for the failure of the cavalry's mission early in the campaign.
Yeah, they both suck.
Right.
Richard Ewell has been universally criticized for failing to seize the high ground on the afternoon of the 1st of July. Once again, the disagreement centers on Lee's orders, which provided general guidance for Ewell to act if practicable. Many historians speculate that Stonewall Jackson, if he had survived Chancellorsville, would have aggressively seized Culp's Hill,
Damn right.
rendering Cemetery Hill indefensible and changing the entire complexion of the battle.
I think so.
A differently worded order from Lee might have made the difference with his subordinate. Right, that's Lee's fault too.
Right.
Can't just be, not everybody Stonewall.
Right.
Some people need a clear freaking explanation.
And Lee was always like that. A.P. Hill has received some criticism for his ineffective performance. His action caused the battle to begin and then escalate on July 1st, despite Lee's orders not to bring on a general engagement, although historians point out that Hill kept Lee well informed of his actions during the day. However, Hill's illness minimized his personal involvement in the remainder of the battle, and Lee took the explicit step of temporarily removing troops from Hill's corps and giving them to Longstreet for Pickett's charge.
In addition to Hill's illness, Lee's performance was affected by heart troubles, which would eventually lead to his death in 1870. Oh, poor guy. Yeah. He had been diagnosed with pericarditis by his staff physicians in March of 1863, though modern doctors believe he had, in fact, suffered a heart attack.
Probably.
As a final factor, Lee faced a new and formidable opponent in George Meade, and the Army of Potomac fought well on its home territory. Although new to his Army command, Meade deployed his forces relatively effectively, relied on strong subordinates such as Winfield Hancock to make decisions where and when they were needed, took great advantage of defensive positions, nimbly shifted defensive resources on interior lines to parry strong threats, and, unlike some of his predecessors, stood his ground throughout the battle in the face of fierce Confederate attacks.
It's true. Most of them just
all
like,
of them, what's his name?
Hood and
McClellan and they would just like, we gotta go.
Lee was quoted before the battle as saying, Meade would commit no blunders on my front, and if I make one, will make a haste to take advantage of it. He knew. That prediction proved to be correct at Gettysburg. Stephen Sears wrote, the fact of the matter is that George Meade, unexpectedly and against all odds, thoroughly outgeneraled Robert E. Lee at Gettysburg. Because Lee was used to everybody just running off, like he said. And that didn't happen. Edwin B. Coddington wrote that the soldiers of the Army of Potomac received a sense of triumph which grew into an imperishable faith in themselves. The men knew what they could do under an extremely competent general. One of the lesser ability and courage could well have lost the battle. Yes, and if it would have been McClellan or something. Hooker, yeah.
Meade had his own detractors as well, though. Similar to the situation with Lee, Meade suffered partisan attacks about his performance at Gettysburg, but he had the misfortune of experiencing them in person. Supporters of his predecessor, Hooker, lambasted Meade before the U.S. Congress's Joint Committee on the Conduct of War, where radical Republicans suspected that Meade was a copperhead and tried in vain to relieve him from command. Daniel Sickles and Daniel Butterfield accused Meade of planning to retreat from Gettysburg during the battle. Most politicians, including Lincoln, criticized Meade for what they considered to be his half-hearted pursuit of Lee after. Well, they all do that.
Right. They're like, you come out here and run after this guy.
A number of Meade's most competent subordinates, Winfield Hancock, John Gibbon, Gouverneur Warren, and Henry Hunt, all heroes of the battle, defended Meade in print, but Meade was embittered by the overall experience.
Yeah.
That's because the North is just a bunch of idiots. Yeah. All their politicians, they're all idiots.
And Meade is probably the best general until Grant. Actually, Meade was probably better than Grant.
Well, maybe. Grant, what did he do?
Exactly. And he's probably one of the worst.
He came in at the right time when the South was already pretty much gone.
Everybody thinks he's so great, and he's one of the worst presidents ever. Terrible.
I don't think he was.
He was a terrible president.
Generally, neither here nor there on him.
Gettysburg National Cemetery and Gettysburg National Military Park are maintained by the U.S. National Park Services as two of the nation's most revered historical landmarks. Although Gettysburg is one of the best known of the Civil War battlefields, it too faces threats to its preservation and interpretation. Why? Leave it alone, people. Morons. Many historically significant locations on the battlefield lie outside the boundaries of Gettysburg National Military Park and are vulnerable to residential or commercial development.
So why don't you extend the National Military Park?
Some preservation successes have emerged in recent years, though. Two proposals to open a casino at Gettysburg were defeated in 2006 and most recently again in 2011. When public pressure forced the Pennsylvania Game and Control Board to reject the proposed gambling hub at the intersection of Routes 15 and 30 near East Cavalry Field.
What a bunch of dirty sons of bitches, dude. Let's put a casino here. Idiots. The American Battlefield Trusts also successfully purchased and transferred 95 acres at the former site of the Gettysburg Country Club to the control of the U.S. Department of the Interior in 2011. Less than half of the over 11,500 acres on the old Gettysburg battlefield have been preserved for posterity thus far. Nice. American Battlefield Trust and its partners, who are these partners,
Right.
have acquired and preserved 1,242 acres of the battlefield in more than 40 separate transactions since 1997. Some of these acres are now among the 4,998 acres, just put two more,
Right.
of the National Military Park of Gettysburg. I mean,
Fantastic. 2015, the trust made one of its most important and expensive acquisitions, paying $60 million for a 4-acre parcel that included the stone house that Confederate General Robert E. Lee used as his headquarters during the battle. I mean, I guess. The trust raised...
how is it that 150 years later they still don't have that?
I know, right? Well, the trust raised a motel, restaurant, and other buildings within the parcel to restore Lee's headquarters and the site to where they were to their wartime appearance. Fantastic. Adding interpretive signs. Hey. It opened the site to the public in October of 2016. Fantastic.
At the 50th anniversary Gettysburg reunion in 1913, 50,000 veterans attended according to a 1938 Army medical report. Historian Carol Reardon writes that attendance included at least 35,000 Union veterans, and though estimates of attendees ran as high as 56,000, only a few more than 7,000 were Confederates, mostly from Virginia and North Carolina. Some veterans reenacted Pickett's charge in a spirit of reconciliation, a meeting that carried great emotional force for both sides, I imagine. There was a ceremonial mass handshake across a stone wall on Cemetery Ridge. Nice.
Dude, can you imagine being the actual fighters and reenacting the battle?
Right.
Oh, my.
They just start killing each other for real.
At the 75th anniversary of Gettysburg in 1938, 1,333 Union veterans and 479 Confederate veterans attended.
Damn, dude, look at that. 25 years and they're almost all gone.
Film records survive of 2 Gettysburg reunions held on the battlefield. The Battle of Gettysburg was depicted in 1993 film Gettysburg, based on Michael Shara's 1975 novel The Killer Angels. The film and the novel focus primarily on the actions of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, John Buford, and Robert E. Lee, and James Longstreet during the battle. They did.
All right, there you go. That's going to do it for the largest battle
Stupidity.
of the war.
Stupidity. Let's walk across 3 football fields while there's 15,000 guys pointing guns at us.
More than about 15.
Ridiculous. And then have to climb a fence. So you basically stopped right there. It's like trying to get out of a crowded movie theater with one exit. It's dumb. Wow. That was the stupidest thing in the world. Oh, wow.
Whoever.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. Crazy stuff with Gettysburg. We told you it was going to be a big one. About an hour and a half this one took. But unfortunately for the Union, the war ain't over. We still got another 2 years to go. Next episode, we'll be taking on the Battle of Hunterstown, which, this happens on July 2nd. During the battle, where before Stuart gets in there, where Stuart's trying to go to do something.
We don't even know what Stuart was doing.
And then we got the Battle of Fairfield, which is July 3rd of the Gettysburg campaign. And then we have the Battle of Tebbs Bend, which is in Kentucky during Morgan's raid. The South, trying to divert the attention of the Army of Ohio from Southern forces in the state.
Didn't do it.
No. Okay, random Kentucky battle thrown in there. And then we'll have the Jackson expedition, which after Vicksburg, the South, or Grant wants to go and take Jackson, Mississippi back.
Right.
And some big stuff happens there. That'll be one just by itself, because this is a pretty long one there. So we got those coming up next 2 weeks. And with that, that was the Gettysburg battle, deadliest of them all.
Crazy.
And biggest on American soil ever.
Simple stuff changed that battle. Probably for the Union's good.
Well, clearly.
If Jeb Stuart wasn't running around acting like a madman, we could still be we could be pledging allegiance to the CSA right now. I only got about
Confederate States of America.
I only got about halfway through that movie. It was ridiculously stupid.
Yeah, it was dumb. They had interviews with
Commercial,
Lincoln,
yeah.
and he was in Canada and shit. So dumb. But yeah, they had they would have commercials for shackles and stuff.
Right.
These are the most dependable shackles on the market, and stupid shit like that, dude. So dumb. Yeah, that'll do it for us. And the Battles of Gettysburg. We'll be back next week. And make sure you're going to check out our other podcast, Outlaws and Gunslingers, where this week's episode's all about the commission. Or no, this week's episode is is the
and then we got the conferences coming up.
is the Havana and the Atlantic City conferences. Not only can you go listen to that on your favorite podcast app, but this podcast and Outlaws and Gunslingers is available on our YouTube every Tuesday for Outlaws and Gunslingers, every Friday for this show on at Bang Dang Network on YouTube. New episodes released there and on podcast, so go check us out. Go subscribe to our YouTube, get our subscribers up there, and look for our new show coming down the pike in just literally a couple more weeks from now. We'll let you know probably next week. We'll probably start recording that about next week. We'll let you know what that's going to be all about. That'll be on YouTube and your favorite podcast app as well. So we'll be back next week for more Battles of the American Civil War. We are the Mother Michiganders with
Bang Dang.